What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Happy Friday. Just in the past couple days, just going through the YouTube comments on my last video. Unfortunately, the recap to the Steelers postseason exit. Saw a lot of you guys requesting like some predictions just on some roster turnover stuff. Which players are going to be back, which players are going to be let go. So, what I kind of wanted to do with this video is just I compiled a list of basically all their top free agents, potential cap casualties, and I'll even touch on one specific potential trade scenario involving a particular wide receiver. We'll talk about that towards the end of the video. Obviously with the Steelers out of the playoffs, it really sucks that we're not previewing a playoff game right now. But I am really excited to continue pumping out content. Speaking of content, big announcement that I'm really excited to share with you guys, something I've been working on kind of behind the scenes a little bit. But starting on Monday, I am bringing back the NFL Draft Podcast with my good friend Nick Martin. We've had Nick on here before on the channel, so you guys, a lot of you all are probably already familiar with him. This is very nostalgic for me, maybe for some of you guys too that have followed me for a long time. Before I left All Steelers Talk and joined Steelers Now, Nick and I were doing a draft podcast over there on a weekly basis, and it was a lot of fun. Nick is someone that I respect a ton, such a smart evaluator, really entertaining. There's very few people's opinion on NFL draft prospects that I value more than his. He and I are continuing like basically all year long to shooting stuff back, forth DMs and things like that. So I'm really excited to put this out for you guys. I think, you all are really going to love this. The first episode is going to drop this coming Monday. And we're going to do that all the way up until draft weekend. So let me know your thoughts on that. I hope that you guys are excited because I'm really jacked up about it as well. Just before we get started, if you guys could just like the video, sub to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and drop me a comment. Any questions that you guys have. If you all have an NFL draft related question, now would be a good time to drop that. Maybe it'll find its way onto the podcast on Monday. You never know. But without further ado, let's get to it. So like I said, I'm going to start off with kind of the pending free agents. I'm not going to go over every single name just because I'm going to go over the more pertinent figures at play here. No more important than what the Steelers are going to do at the quarterback position. You listen to Mike Tomlin's press conference. Sounds like there could potentially be some changes. I'm not going to go over like the coaching staff and things like that. We don't have any word on that. It seems like potential change at quarterback is definitely on the table. Tomlin was very complimentary of both of the guys that they brought in, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, and I think that is deserved. Going back to last offseason, I understood the moves that they made. Moving on Kenny Pickett, which I thought was a necessary move that they needed to make. They took two really cheap dart throws at Russell Wilson to see if they could kind of help him revive his career. And then, you trade a late day 3 pick for Justin Fields. I think overall, both of those guys, when they got the chance to play, I think the returns probably even exceeded what they gave up to acquire them, right? Both of them were really cheap on the salary cap. And they got good play at various different times of the season. But obviously, as we kind of continue to move forward here, the goal can't be just to squeak into the playoffs. You got to continue to look at the ways that you can improve the roster, look at the teams that are continually successful around the NFL, and it really starts at the quarterback position. So with Russ, man, my prediction is that I think that Russ is going to walk. And that has to do with a couple different things. Arthur Smith doesn't seem like he's going to get one of these head coaching jobs. I think some of the stuff that's came out of the building over the last week, which I think is very interesting, is like, you're hearing some stuff about maybe Art and Russ didn't really necessarily see eye to eye on things. I don't think you need to necessarily be in the room to understand that. You look at the stuff that they were running through the passing game, was very far from like what Art typically likes to do. More tailored to Russ's skill set, which is what he should have been doing. Like that Russ has a very particular style of play that he likes to play. But over the course of the season, Russ finished, he was 23rd in EPA per dropback among quarterbacks. He did lead the entire NFL in big-time throw percentage, was really accurate down the field, throwing the moon balls, something that's always been a really major key in his game. But I think as the season kind of wore on, the limitations started showing up more and more down the stretch. I think Pittsburgh, you look at the final month of the regular season, Pittsburgh was the worst offense in the league over the final 4 weeks. If you exclude the Browns, who were very obviously tanking for a better draft position, things like that. I just think with his age and his play style, like the way that he likes to scramble, just the way that he likes to play in general, I think it's going to be pretty impossible for his game to even more than like marginally improve. And I think that, as the physical limitations start to become more and more evident, those things could, his play could potentially even drop off even further. So I think he's always going to be a guy. He's going to take a ton of sacks. He's going to give you a lot of big plays over the top. But the things that I keep coming back to, man, is like 23 pressure to sack rate. That's pretty high for a starting quarterback in the NFL. Also was throwing the ball away at the highest rate among NFL quarterbacks. And we just know that he's not going to throw it to the middle of the field. So when you look at those things, I think it really hampers what you're really able to do through the passing game. Now, could things improve? Like if they did bring Russ back on a cheaper contract, could they improve if you go get another like alpha style receiver on the outside to where like he could just kind of pick and choose his one-on-ones out there on the boundary? Yeah, I'll definitely acknowledge that there were more issues with the offense this season than just the quarterback. Like, there's no doubt that this was not like a premier situation to get thrown into. We talked a lot about their failure to kind of provide more talent on the perimeter with their skill position players and things like that. But I also think like it's just hard to imagine them being able to construct a top 10, top 12 offense, which is really what you need to compete in the NFL these days. So I think Russ is probably going to walk, which kind of leads into the Justin Fields thing. I think Fields is going to be the cheaper option. My prediction is I think he's going to stay, but maybe just not stay as like the cemented starter. I think a lot of people have seen some of the quotes from Arthur Smith talking about Justin Fields and kind of reading between the lines that he may have preferred Justin as opposed to Russ, even though they do have some similarities at quarterback. And I think that probably does, match how Arthur Smith probably feels. I do think that he would probably prefer Justin. If you look at the numbers, like weeks 1 through 6, Justin was 16th in EPA per play, 19th in success rate. That's pretty solid. Obviously, not exactly lighting up the scoreboard, but he was doing some decent things, taking care of the football for the most part. I think he was really making strides. I think back to that Chargers game, which was really one of his better performances of his career. I thought he was making strides up until that Dallas game. And then we just started to kind of see things go downhill a bit. The Cowboys game was really rough from a film perspective. I think that that alone made them want to kind of take a peek behind the curtain. 2 weeks later, they end up making the switch. So I think the issue with Fields, man, is like that he's always been really hesitant to trigger on stuff in the passing game. And in the pros, he's just really struggled to find a balance between like being able to play free and quick while avoiding being like completely reckless. It always seems like we're on one side of the pendulum with him. And that goes back to his days at Chicago. At this point in his career, it's really difficult to see like Justin developing into like a franchise caliber guy, because you bring him back on a 1 to 2 year deal on a cheap contract, sort of like a bridge deal where it's like, hey, we are interested in making you like one of the highest paid backups in the league. For right now, you're the starter, but you're not promised anything. We're still going to pursue other options. And that kind of just depends on what the Steelers want to do, right? Like you look at the draft class, you look at the free agent class, there aren't a lot of like surefire options at quarterback that the Steelers are going to be able to drastically improve. And even if you're talking about minor improvements, you're probably talking about big, significant investments, either with money or resources or things like that. So I think bringing Fields back, even as a backup, a highly compensated one, makes a lot of sense just because, see if you can continue to develop him. He gives you a nice fallback plan. The Steelers probably still make the playoffs, or at least are in wild card contention with Justin under center. Like I said, I'm not probably as optimistic about the ceiling of that, or really as curious about like, could he be the long-term guy in Pittsburgh? But I just look at the reality of where the Steelers found themselves in. I'm just not sure that there are a ton of paths to acquire that like quarterback that they've been really so desperately searching for. So that's kind of my thoughts on the quarterback situation. I would predict that probably Russ is going to walk. Justin will be back on some type of short-term, relatively cheap deal. So, going on to the running back conversation here, this is another one. The Steelers ran the ball basically at the highest rate of anyone in the league, especially on like early downs, things like that. So this was an offense that kind of had the vision of being like a really dominant group in the trenches. They wanted to control the game with their backs, their running attack. And that really just never really came to fruition. They were one of the least efficient rushing teams in the NFL. I don't necessarily put all of that on the two running backs that are free agents. They had some turnover on the offensive line. They had some injuries, which we'll talk about. And just things just never really improved the way that I kind of anticipated it being the case, coming into the season. I thought that they would really gel over the second half. And for one reason or another, or a combination of reasons, just never happened. But as far as like Najee Harris, the Steelers did decline like his fifth-year option. Najee was Najee this year for the most part, man. Like you look at the numbers, they're pretty similar to what he's done like his entire career. He broke 63 tackles this season. Once again, he's always a really tough dude to get down on the ground. But even with that being said, I mean, he's still ranked 24th out of 31 qualifying backs in yards after contact per attempt. I think it really just comes down to value here and scheme fit. When I talk about scheme fit, Najee saw the highest percentage of his reps go outside the tackles this season, with like Arthur Smith coming in, them running a lot of wide zone, outside zone type rushing concepts. And I just don't think that that's really conducive to his skill set. This is a downhill runner that we're talking about, somebody that I would like to see go play somewhere else, and try to see if he can get into like more of a gap or power heavy offense and just see what he could do with it. I do think that there are some physical limitations with Najee in terms of like just explosiveness. He kind of just lacks that create ability that I think you look for in like top tier backs that you maybe want to give a second contract to. But you look at the free agent market, man, like you can easily make a case that he's the best option out there for NFL teams. He's going to be able to search the market, get the best deal. It's like him and Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is going to be 32 years old. He's struggled to stay healthy. One thing about Harris is like he's always been available. So Najee's been a very solid player for the Steelers. Maybe didn't live up to like the first round draft pick reputation that he was drafted as, but I think overall he's a solid player. I just don't think it makes a ton of sense to bring him back. If the Steelers weren't set or interested in keeping him in the long-term fold, I can't imagine why they would have declined his 5th-year option, which was like $6 million. I kind of said this before the season that I was pretty sure that he was going to be gone, barring some like huge breakout season where he just looked like it was a glove-like fit in Arthur Smith's system, and they had a ton of success offensively, and none of those things really transpired. So I just think for me, it's just about, get cheaper, find someone that's a better fit for the system, and, wish Najee the best. Hopefully he catches on somewhere else, and, there's a very good chance that happens. So kind of on the flip side of that, Jaylen Warren, Warren dealt with a lot of injuries over the course of the season, was banged up, I think, through the first half of the season with some various different injuries. You look at some of the numbers, it's really tough to compare the two backs because they don't necessarily get the same carries. They kind of are brought in to do different things, different down and distances, facing different like box counts and things like that. So it's not always fair to compare the two guys and say like which dude is doing better, things like that. But Warren did average 0.32 yards per attempt better than Harris in terms of creating yards after contact on a per rush basis. Pretty solid numbers. Obviously, you get the pass pro benefits. I always think that Warren's a good player to have back there. He's pretty solid at picking up blitzes. Very few like mental lapses. He's going to put his face in the fan when he needs to. And then obviously what he offers you as a check down, just being a reliable guy, catching the football, third downs. You can use him pretty much across the board. The thing about Warren is, he's only got 6 career games in 3 seasons with more than 12 carries. Obviously, Harris has pretty much been the bell cow of the backfield, and Warren's been more of a complementary piece. And that's honestly like kind of how I see him. I don't necessarily think I see him as like a 1A type of lead back. Even the days of the bell cow have kind of like, been brushed aside. A lot of teams are using running back spot committees, which just makes more sense with the shelf life of the position. Trying to keep guys fresh and get the most out of these guys. But Warren to me is like a number 2 type of back. And somebody who could potentially be like a 1B in the right system. I also don't think he's like a great scheme fit for the outside zone stuff either. So it's kind of funky just with the personnel and Arthur Smith being the offensive coordinator, assuming he's going to be back, which I think he is. But I think you're going to really need to try to pair him up with a talented guy out of the draft. More than likely, this is a great draft class for running backs. We'll talk a lot about that over the next couple of months. I think investing in somebody potentially even on like day 2 would make a lot of sense. Warren could, help get that guy up to speed, and they can kind of split carries, and you can kind of do some of those things. Now, Warren, what makes him different than a lot of these guys we're going to talk about, he's a restricted free agent because he wasn't drafted. The way the restricted free agent thing goes, like to my knowledge, is like basically they can put a tender on Warren, a first round tender, which they're not going to do. A second round tender is basically a 1-year deal around $5 million. So it's relatively reasonable. I mean, there's not a ton of running backs like making more money than that, but I think a 1-year deal around $5 million makes some sense with Jaylen. They could also like potentially work out like a long-term deal. That's something they could do. And they could also go with like the right of first refusal, which just gives them, a chance to kind of match opposing teams' offers. My thought process is I think he stays. I don't think there's a scenario where they just completely move on from both these guys and just start from scratch. I mean, there could be. Like I said, this would be the draft class to do it if you were going to take that approach. I just think for what Warren provides you in the short term, I would probably want him back at least for next season to help a rookie kind of get acclimated. And that would just be what I would do too. And that's what I think happens. So kind of moving on to the offensive line here before we get to the defensive side of the football. Dan Moore Jr., left tackle. I think this has been really written in stone, really dating back to last April, right? I think Dan Moore Jr. is going to walk. You don't spend back-to-back first-round picks on tackles if those guys aren't going to be the potential cornerstones or building blocks for your team. With Dan Moore, I really thought he got off to a good start to the season. I think he was their best run blocking tackle this year. He was fairly consistent in the run game all season long. A lot of their stuff really flowed in his direction to kind of take advantage of that. But I think before the bye week, he only allowed 2 sacks. After the bye, 10 sacks. So it's just like a complete drop off in pass protection results. And I don't necessarily know that was him playing all that much different. I just think it was really a competition thing. Like they saw Myles Garrett a couple times. They saw Trey Hendrickson a couple times. And like those caliber players have just historically had his number. And he's just not that type of tackle that's going to be able to shut those guys out one-on-one. You're going to have to flow a lot of help in his direction. The NFL is always desperate for offensive linemen. We don't have enough competent, capable guys to block all these freaky edge rushers, freaky pass rushers across the league. Someone's going to get Dan Moore Jr. some money. And I think that it could be a good thing for the Steelers because I think they could potentially play themselves into the compensatory pick situation there. They could get a comp pick for him, and then you move on. You put Fautanu at one of the sides if you want to move Broderick over to left tackle. The one caveat I think some people would say is like, what happens, we haven't seen enough from Broderick Jones to really want him to be a starter. I think you've just got to give Broderick one more year. I personally was pretty disappointed with the season that we got from Broderick, but I will also acknowledge I don't know if he was fully healthy or what percentage that he was playing at throughout the season. To me, his development's been really stagnant, but potentially, if you want to move him to the left side, throw him into the fire and just say like, hey, this is your last shot. We'll look for a different solution next season. Or maybe it's one of those things where they bring in a cheaper veteran option as kind of like a break safe glass in case of emergency type of thing, where if, Broderick just looks so unplayable over the course of the first month of the season. But, the Steelers, there was only 3 tackles in the NFL this season that gave up double-digit sacks. And the Steelers had 2 of them. So it's obviously not great. So regardless of what you're going to do at the quarterback position next year, you're going to have to get better tackle play, especially in a system that does a pretty good job of protecting its tackles because there's a lot of play action. There's not a ton of true drop back stuff. So yeah, tackle play has to be better, but I just don't think that Moore is going to play into that equation. Now, as far as at the guard position, James Daniels, this one's really interesting to me because I think before the season when they opted to not do an extension with him, I kind of just wrote that off as like, okay, you drafted McCormick in the first round. Potentially he's a guy, or like you just don't want to pay, premier money to guards, whatever. Maybe that's the new philosophy for them. But, then he gets hurt early in the season. He was having a decent start to the year. I think it's really a bummer because I talked about the offensive line. Like I thought that this was going to be a group that really gelled over the course of the season. And perhaps they would have if Daniels wouldn't have gotten hurt because he was probably the guy that this system probably benefited the most, which is really tough. He's only 27 years old. This dude came into the league super young, but he's also coming off a significant injury with the Achilles. It's difficult to say like what his market's going to be out there. How much interest is there going to be in him? I would think that somebody would probably still sign him to come in and, start. I don't think we have that many good guards in the league right now, but also at the same time, I have no idea how his rehab's going or anything like that. If he would even want to return, I really don't know. If anything, it seems like Daniels is a guy that would probably benefit from taking like a 1-year prove it deal, whether that's here or somewhere else. He signs for 1 year on the cheap, tries to rebuild his value, prove to guys, GMs around the league that he's healthy and he can still play at a high level. And then he gets to hit the market next year at, 28 years old, 28, 29, and he can still get a pretty nice bag out of that. So I don't know. I lean towards him walking, but the injury just complicates things as far as like, also, I have no idea like where his health's at. I do think that Isaac Seumalo is kind of getting up there in age. Like you probably still need to find a guard somewhere, whether that's through the draft or through free agency. You probably need a guard somewhere. I think Mason McCormick's play over the second half of the season really tailed off, kind of struggled with some things like you would expect from a day 3 rookie that really wasn't expected to play this season. But I'm not sure if Daniels, what that situation is going to be like, if they'll have a ton of contact with him or anything like that. But, kind of moving on to the defensive side of the ball, there's really less, a lot of the defensive players, I mean, they've got so much money spent over there. A lot of those guys already have their contract situations like loaded up. And then the others are like more obvious names like Cam Sutton, there's no reason to bring him back, things like that. But Dante Jackson's the guy that's played the most on the defensive side of the ball. It's difficult to predict this one as well. The 5 interceptions were really nice. I felt like he played solid over the first couple of weeks of the season. I do think things tailed off pretty quickly after that. Finished the season really rough, gave up a touchdown in 4 of the last 6 games, dealt with some minor injuries. He had the back thing late in the season. He's also not a very good tackler, 22% missed tackle rate. It's kind of tough because Steelers have a lot of bad tacklers at the cornerback position right now. Turn 30 next season as well, which is kind of like the cornerback cliff. It seems like there is some interest on both sides in terms of continuing to do business together. The team, when they made the deal, which actually I don't know that necessarily either team won the deal necessarily, the Deontay Johnson, Dante Jackson thing. When they made that trade, they said that, there was talk out there that the Steelers have been after him for quite a while, and they were interested in his skill set, even dating back to him coming out of LSU in the draft. So I kind of think I lean towards him returning. I think it's really just depends on the money. I don't think I would be favoring anything that would pay him more than he made this season. He took a pay cut to come to Pittsburgh. I think his cap hit was $6 million. I would not be in favor of that for 2025. If it was a 1 or 2 year deal for $2 or $3 million, something close to the vet minimum, maybe a little bit more than that, because I do like the speed. If it was something like that, I think it's okay just to bring a veteran back. And as long as that doesn't preclude you from being aggressive in the draft to go get a cornerback and a long-term option opposite Joey Porter Jr. So I think Jackson's a pretty limited player. But you could probably do worse. I would prefer them to try to upgrade that position, but I do think that there's a good chance that they would at least try to bring him back on some type of short-term deal. So my prediction is that he stays. But Elandon Roberts, I think this is a no-brainer from all angles. I think he stays. I think the team will want him back. I know Elandon Roberts wants to be back. Had 24 run stops on the season. I think that was 3rd on the team. He's a really good leader in the locker room. He wants to return. Like I said, he's going to be cheap. Teams don't shell out a lot for these run-stopping off-ball linebackers. He is going to be 31 years old, so you got to be really mindful of that. Peyton Wilson's probably going to take even more snaps next season. I think Patrick Queen is going to be back as well. The way his contract is structured, they could get out of it, but that's not something that I would necessarily advise of, although I will acknowledge that I think they probably need better play across the board from a lot of their highly paid players, not just Queen, but just across the board. This defense did not finish on a high note down the stretch, and that was particularly concerning. But I think that Roberts in general is somebody that I would definitely like to retain, and not to get into story time mode or anything like that. But when I went to training camp this year and covered that for Steelers Now, I was about 5 feet away from backs on backers, that drill. And when they did that, man, I'm he's just up there, the intensity that he brings to every single drill, every single rep, talking the young guys up, getting them amped up, help coaching guys off to the side. He was even giving pointers and stuff to guys that had no shot to make the team. And I just think he's a really good leader and somebody that I would want to have. Obviously, he's a limited player in kind of a niche role, but he was somebody that I would really like to retain. Just to kind of briefly touch on some other things, some cap casualties. The Steelers, in terms of cap space, are about in the middle of the pack among the NFL right now. If you look at it for 2025, they've got about, I want to say it's 40, 50 million. I'm looking at over the cap right now, but this could be wrong. But they've got a decent amount of cap space. They're middle of the pack, like I said, but they also have some, I think, fairly obvious moves that they can make to kind of clear up some more cap. I'll kind of go over these. I tweeted this out a couple days ago on Twitter. I'll expand on it a little bit. Preston Smith, you can clear about $13 million worth of cap space. Preston had 7 pressures after being acquired at the deadline. He was inactive for a couple games after that point. He's going to be 33 years old next season. Guys that don't start or are going to play more than a couple snaps kind of have to be able to play special teams, or those snaps that they do have to be extremely impactful. But there was no way that a $13 million cap hit was going to be manageable. This was always kind of a rental deal, and something I understand why they did it at the time. But that's a no-brainer. He'll be released before the season starts, and I don't necessarily think he would be somebody that they would even want to bring back on a cheaper deal after the fact, just because, like I said, he doesn't play special teams, get up there in age. It's just not really something that I think they'll be interested in. One that I do want to talk about is Larry Ogunjobi. You can clear $7 million worth of cap space by releasing him. Ogunjobi's an interesting player because I think we talk a lot about like how good the Steelers front is and how the front seven is kind of the strength of their team. But like Ogunjobi had the third highest cap hit of any Steeler this season, and it's like we barely talk about him. Like not just like myself, but just in general. Like we don't ever hear from him. Like whether it's on game days or like just on like social media. And like the numbers kind of back that up too. Like among 76 interior defensive linemen, this is according to PFF. He had 250 with 250 pass rush snaps. He ranked 63rd out of 76 in pressures. And like Ogunjobi's not a run defender. Like he's a guy who likes to shoot gaps. He will make some plays in the backfield every now and then with his athleticism, his first step. But he's not a guy that's going to like hold doubles or like really take back space in terms of like stacking and shedding guys in the trenches as well. So like if he's not really a run defender and he's one of the least productive pass rushers in the NFL at his position, I mean, the guys that are like below him are pretty much like your zero tech nose tackles, guys that are clearly in there. They're just there to like take up space. They're trying to take two blockers with them. They're not necessarily rush guys. So I think to me, like, I think you should probably want to improve on that position, if anything else. And even if like you're saying like, hey, we've invested enough in the front, we've got two highly paid edge rushers, got Keanu Benton that we're excited about. We've got a linebacker core that we like as well. Even if it's something like, hey, we just think we need another dude, like another guy, you can just go out and get this type of production like for relatively cheap, closer to the vet minimum on the free agent market with the veteran. And Ogunjobi's dealt with some injuries, and that's worth noting in necessary context. But now that he's over 30 years old, like I'm sure that those things aren't going to get better. Last year of his deal, I think that this has probably been. This was a contract that I was not a fan of when they signed it originally. I thought that it was definitely too steep. It's not necessarily anything that's like hampered their cap or their, prevented them from doing anything they wanted to do from a financial standpoint. But it was one of the least, my least favorite contracts that they've given out in quite a while. And I just don't think things have worked out. And I would probably recommend them moving on. Now, will they? I don't know. Cause I think you could have made the same exact argument last year because he wasn't all that productive in 2023, but just kind of two more names I want to mention. Cole Holcomb, these dudes, you can clear $6 million in cap with him. He's only played 15 games the last 3 seasons. Obviously missed all of this year, rehabbing from that injury. It really sucks for Cole because this has really just been a story of his career. Like he's never really been able to stay consistently on the field, I should say. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing more that you can say about that. I think they had a vision for him as a player, but just got unlucky. So I think that'll be a move that I anticipate making. Like I said, I would already anticipate them bringing Roberts back. You got Peyton Wilson, you got Patrick Queen. I just don't think that you're going to want to bring in like a fourth off-ball linebacker, especially above the vet minimum. Somebody, could he play special teams? Sure. But I think they'll probably go cheaper and younger at that position. And I think like the most obvious one really has to be like, aside from Preston Smith, of course, Cordero Patterson, you can clear $2.8 million in cap space. Patterson did not even play, I don't think, on offense the final game of the season. His the results, I think the reason why they brought him in here was to return kicks, but he averaged 21.8 yards per kick return. That was dead last in the NFL. It's just not good enough. I mean, obviously, Patterson at his age, just getting up there in age, I just think, father time, it waits for nobody. It gets everybody. So I think it's just got Cordero Patterson. I think over the course of the season, he just looked extremely slow and lacked explosiveness. So I think that, Patterson carved out a really cool career for himself with the position switch and some of the cool things that he was able to do. But it's time. So I don't want to talk a lot about the George Pickens thing just because, but I know I'm going to be asked about it. I feel like I've already been asked about it in Twitter DMs and mentions and everything else about like what they're going to do with George. My stance has really not changed. I think that George is more likely to be traded than he is to get extended. That's just my opinion. And this really dates back to the things that we talked about last offseason. You look at the course of action for the Steelers and the things that they put into motion. They traded Deontay Johnson. They moved George Pickens to the X receiver role, the number one option within the offense. They brought in a wide receivers coach who was like, I won't say notorious, but like he has a reputation for being a tougher coach. I think that was very much on purpose. And then also like, I think getting Deontay Johnson, trading him away was to kind of make sure that George was being put in a better environment, try to build some better habits for him. Something we talked about when they made the trade and dealt Deontay away was George was frequently late to things 2 years ago. And that was one of the things, like they wanted to get him around better influences and just kind of separate those two guys. And, obviously we don't need to go into like what happened to Deontay. He's been on like 5 different teams over the past, 3 months or whatever. But I just think, some of the stuff that's coming out like after the season, like him being late to the Chiefs game, whatever, man. Like that's not the first time that he was late this year. I know that for a fact. It's not the last time either. I just think it really goes back to me. It's like even like on the field, I think the effort and just overall consistency is inconsistent, and I think that that's problematic when you're talking about a guy like going into his 4th year. I mean, he's still a young player. There's definitely there's nobody who's been like, I feel like a bigger fan of like Georgia's talent, even dating back to his days at Georgia. I was one of the biggest, I feel like, voices in trying to get the Steelers to draft him. I still remember like talking to him at the combine, was super high on his potential. I think he can still be a really dynamic player in the league. It's just at this point, and you get into a situation where a guy's production says that you have to give him a pretty decent contract. But, is the work ethic there? And when your highest paid players, not only do they need to be your best players or your biggest producers or anything like that, they also have to be leaders on the team. And that doesn't necessarily mean you got to be a rah-rah guy. That doesn't mean you have to be this guy who gets up and gives a bunch of speeches, but you got to be able to lead by example. And if you're not consistently on time, your effort is in and out, things like that. I don't see that being the type of player, the type of dude that they really want to build that room around. That's just my opinion. We'll see what happens. But obviously it could play out a number of different ways. I'd be shocked if they gave him an extension. I've been wrong before, though. We'll see. It could also play out to where maybe they don't trade him. Maybe they just see how the draft goes. They see how free agency lands, the type of talent that they're able to acquire. Because that's one of the things that makes it difficult is they don't necessarily have guys waiting in the wings. This is a receiver room that needs to add talent, and probably in the form of a significant move or multiple substantial moves. So trading your only really dynamic player is risky, but that's one of the things where they could maybe hold on to him going into the season. And could that be a distraction? Certainly. I think it's going to be a circus around like his potential contract extension stuff. I think it will turn into that. But it could also be like one of those things where you say like, hey, we're going to let him play out the final season of his rookie deal. We're going to hope that we can try to reach him and we'll get more consistency out of him and try to see if we can bank on that. And then, midway through the season, we see where we're at with him. And then maybe it's a Claypool situation, right? Where it's like at the deadline, you're not necessarily going to be able to push for a Super Bowl, even though the Steelers probably are talking themselves into that reality right now. And you could deal him and get like even more for him at the trade deadline to a team that's looking to contend or something like that. Then you win the offseason. I think if they were to try to trade him, I think they'd probably get like a 3rd round pick. And it's hard to say that trading him for a 3rd round pick right now makes the Steelers a better team tomorrow. But I also think that there are obviously severe ramifications if you were to give a player like this a contract extension that, is going to make him one of the highest paid players in the building. So, yeah, it's a really tricky situation. Like I said, I would be surprised if he got a contract extension. I would probably put it in terms of like likelihood. I think it'll probably be, I think maybe like 40% he's here, 30%, he's traded, or probably 40-40-20, like 40% he's here, 40% he's traded, 20% he gets extended. Maybe honestly, that's probably too high. I didn't even really think about that, but that's just my opinion on it. Let me know what you guys think, like what you all think that they should do. There are some other moves that I didn't talk about for various reasons. I'm not going to get too far deep into discussions about like Van Jefferson, Mike Williams, those guys, veteran receivers. You need to upgrade over those guys, no doubt. And like guys that are going to be your 4th wide receivers, they need to play special teams. You probably don't really want to bring them back. If they do, they're kind of guys that'll sit out there on free agency. Maybe you bring them back closer to OTAs after you've kind of constructed the rest of your roster. I would want Ben Skoranek back just because of his special teams acumen and like his blocking ability. I think he's the best blocker on the roster. He's going to be really, really cheap as well. So he'd be a guy that I'd want to return, but the other guys not all that interested in personally. But I really appreciate your all's continued support on the channel, on this video. Just on your way out, please make sure that you like, subscribe, hit that bell, notifications, and all that good stuff. And if you're interested in even more NFL draft content, don't forget I'm doing NFL draft film rooms over on the members only section. That link is in the description. I did a lengthy-ish film room on Ohio State wide receiver Rebecca Abuka. So if you guys are interested in that, be sure to check that out. And also drop me your comments if you have any questions, anything like that. And I will see you guys on Monday for the NFL Draft Pod. Super excited about that. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Peace and love.